And
please. Turn the mic.
it's not.
Turn the microphone.
So they just use this? Is that? Can I use this? Can you hear me now? Okay. So I have a number of questions. How do we, I mean, the spirit behind the questions is how do we avoid the bleak future that, that Yanis is warning us against? Let me start with Greece specifically. One of my questions would be, what are the alternatives for Greeks in this situation? We see basically, Europe blackmailing Greeks that either you follow these austerity measures that have basically failed, that's why a second bailout is necessary, and that have been obviously very unpopular and devastating socially. And the argument, of course, of the government is that there is no alternative. But I'm not convinced that this is indeed the case, and that's my first question with Yanis, because we see anytime there is political instability in Greece, there is a havoc, in the sort of global financial markets, which would seem that might give Greece some leverage and allow it to say no, because again, the sort of leverage that the Europe has is like that they are not going to disburse the latest installment of the loan, and the sort of danger is that Greece would go into a disorderly default, and this, if it were to happen, that would be obviously catastrophic for Greece. But can Europeans really go through with this threat? Can they afford to push Greece into a disorderly default? And if not, then perhaps one alternative would be to have an alternative bloc in Greece that basically would call the European bluff and say no, because they know that Europe might not go do good on its threats. And then, of course, the question becomes, okay, who would do that? It would take, obviously, the political left in Greece to do that. And I would be interested to hear what Yanis thinks about, how the Greek left is dealing with this situation. The Greek left is, quite strong by international standards, but of course, one of the problems is that it is fragmented. Now, another question I would ask is, that I would be interested in, is the significance of the IMF getting involved in the European Union. And this was inconceivable till, just a couple of years ago, and now it has become so commonplace. And of course, the IMF, in many ways, is dominated by the US. So I would be interested in Yanis's thoughts about what does this tell us about the relationship, the changing relationship between the US and the European Union, especially in view of the fact that, the US and the European Union are also economic rivals. And the other thing I would ask is whether Yanis talked about the effects of the euro on the productive structure of the Greek economy. Do you think that the whole schema of core periphery that sociologists have used and economists have used to discuss global inequalities, whether we could say that in some ways this kind of schema of a kind of strong capitalist core exploiting an economically weaker periphery, whether the situation in Europe could be seen in that light, and more generally, whether on a global level, whether neoliberalism could be seen as a way for the capitalist core to prevent or to slow down the ability of low-income countries to industrialize and become rivals to the stronger capitalist powers. I mean, some of the literature on the end of the Bretton Woods system identify the intensification of capitalist competition as one of the factors that led to the demise of the post-war period. The fact that, you know, the US was no longer the dominant industrial power, but you had, you know, in Europe and Japan and even Southeastern Asia, you had a number of countries that industrialized, and you had more intensified competition. I think, the last point I want to ask is, to ask his interpretation about how the austerity policies, who benefits from them? I mean, one possible interpretation would be to say, okay, these austerity policies basically try to make, you know, ordinary working people in the periphery of Europe and around Europe pay for the crisis they didn't cause, and that in a way it is used to reinforce the failing neoliberal model. So two questions here is, could we say that the European Union has been used as a vehicle to sort of push neoliberalism onto Europe and to erode its more social democratic model in the Bretton Woods period? And are the austerity policies designed to push, to entrench neoliberalism further? And could it be perhaps that the other sort of interpretation would be that it's not so much that austerity is beneficial to capitalists, but perhaps it's sort of counterproductive even from their point of view if it leads to the dissolution of the Eurozone? And or is it perhaps that some capitalists will will benefit from the dissolution of the Eurozone and others will be harmed? So these are just some of the questions to sort of stimulate the discussion.
You want to start?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thanks so much. I'm not going to use that. Oh, do I need this? Okay. Take this out of your pocket. Okay, 5 points. I'll try to answer them briefly.
Use the microphone.
Use the mic.
Can't you hear me?
No.
All right. I thought I had a loud voice.
Put it back in the center.
All right, okay. Now, first question.
Back where it was before.
Thank you, Rick. Okay. On the first question about what can the Greeks do? Of course, I'm not advocating that there's nothing we can do. I have been campaigning for at least a year and a half now, actually more than that, even before the first bailout in May 2010, for making every day the 28th of October. Because the 28th of October in Greece is the National No Day. It's the day when we commemorate Greece's no to the fascists that brought Greece into the Second World War. By this, what I mean, so as not to be too facetious, no to the loan agreements. If Greece had a prime minister who could call a press conference, 5-minute press conference, and say, ladies and gentlemen of the foreign press, unfortunately, Greece cannot service its debts. And we're not going to pile up new loans on the old ones when we know we cannot service the old loans, let alone the new ones. So as of tomorrow, 11 o'clock, I'm going to invite our creditors to come and have a chat with us as to better terms and conditions and significant haircuts. I'm very sorry to be doing this, but we'll have no alternative. And sit down and say nothing else. That by itself would put the cat amongst the pigeons. The Eurozone, at that point, would have to make a very simple decision. Either to reinforce its foundations, and that means three things, very briefly. Firstly, to recapitalize forcefully by effectively Europeanizing, not nationalizing, but Europeanizing the banks. Secondly, which is something that is not unheard of, it has been done here, it's been done in Sweden, it was done in Korea. I was talking to the finance minister of Korea, who said to me that the only way we managed to do it in 1998 was to threaten them with the army. Not a left-winger, an extreme right-winger. The second thing we need to do is we need to have the central bank, the European Central Bank, centrally debt manage the Eurozone. It can do it very easily. I won't bother you now with details. And the third thing we need to do is we need a new deal for Europe, which uses the European Investment Bank by which to recycle surpluses in the form of productive investments in the deficit areas. Now, these are very simple technical things. You can do them in a week. The moment you announce them, suddenly the Eurozone is no longer a problem. But there are political reasons why they don't do it. But let me come to the second question about the IMF. Now, I grew up, like you, like all of us, hating the International Monetary Fund. At least the post-1971 International Monetary Fund. But let me tell you, between you and I, they're the good guys now, compared to the European Union. I speak to them. I talk to people who come to Greece to monitor the austerity message. You know what? They don't believe in them. They don't believe it, that from the very first day, the IMF did not believe that this program of austerity and loans for Greece would work. And then, of course, you ask them, so why are you participating in this? They say, we were nearly dead 2 years ago, and now have a chance to put our foot in Europe. We're doing it. But we're following, we do what the Europeans want. Because, you see, the Europeans don't have the institutional framework by which to impose these awful austerity measures. The IMF have had a very long experience doing it. So, they are carrying out policies that they do not believe in. And it's very cynical for them, for the IMF. And they would love to get out of Greece. They would like to see bigger haircuts, more investment in Greece, because they are now worrying. They got into Europe through Greece after almost facing oblivion, and now they are on the verge of being implicated in a complete catastrophe, which will give them another black eye, just like Argentina did, and Southeast Asia. So the IMF are not the bad guys. They are accessories to the murder, but they are not the murderers. The question of the metropolis periphery, I won't say much about that because of course it's true. And what happened in the European Union, it was not a question of a conscious conspiracy to deindustrialize Greece. It simply happened surreptitiously. There was a crisis of Greek capitalism as a result of the crisis of world capitalism in the 1970s. The Greek industries were failing one after the other. They could not sustain the shocks of the oil crisis as well as of globalization. And then, let's say I'm Siemens, the electrical goods company in Germany. I see there is a small market there, quite profitable. There is a Greek company making washing machines and refrigerators. It's gone bust or it's going bust. I go in there, I buy it, I shut it down, and I rebadge my second-rate washing machines and refrigerators as pizzas or Risola and sell them there. There is no plan there to deindustrialize Europe. It's as if there is a plan without there being a plan. Third, who benefits from austerity? Look, the problem with a free fall of capitalism, look at the 1930s, nobody really benefited. It's just a failure. It's a collapse. It's not a standard class war where you have a tug of war where your benefit is my loss and vice versa. There are moments in capitalist dynamics where everybody can lose at the same time. But why are they insisting on austerity measures? Can they possibly believe that more austerity now in Greece is going to help? No, they don't believe in it. Some idiots may in the government, and there are quite a few of those. But there are some very smart people who are very cynical, just like the IMF people. Their reasons for doing it are also institutional. What they know is, look, I was speaking to one of the advisors of Mrs. Merkel, and he put it very, very bluntly to me. He said, of course you're right. This is all pushing us off the cliff. But we don't have the political authority in Germany at the moment to bind Germany to the euro forever, which is what is necessary not to save the euro. So what we're going to do is we're going to carry on buying time until we find it in ourselves to decide one way or the other, which way to jump. We have not decided yet. Do we get out of the euro ourselves, or do we save the euro and marry the euro forever? A Catholic wedding. Right? He didn't say that, that's mine. And while waiting, what we need to do is we need to give Greece more loans so that it doesn't default, because the default will not allow us the time that we need. But to give Greece more loans to avoid the default, we have to go to Parliament in Berlin. And there are all these very weird people there that need to be convinced that Greece has to take tens of billions of money from Germany, from Holland, from the surplus countries, in order to stop default. And the only way of convincing those members of Parliament in Berlin to give money to Greece, not to Greece really, but to the bankers via the Greek government, right, is to show them some blood. Seriously, show them some Greek blood. Look, they're bleeding. And we make them bleed a bit more behind the scenes, right? Stab them a bit, so that they bleed a bit more profusely. And then there's a bit more blood on the floor, and then you say to the members of Parliament of Mrs. Merkel's Christian Democrat, look, they're bleeding. Let's give it to them. And then they pass it. So every time they want to extract more loans from the German Parliament, the Greek working class has to bleed a bit more. Not because they believe that this bleeding is good for them, cleansing and all that. Neoliberalism and the European Union. Of course, if you read any of those, I wish you never do, because it really is bad for the brain to read the European Union treatises and documents. They're written by cretins for idiots. But if you read them, as I was forced to at some point, I no longer do it. It's just, I'm getting too old for that. You'll find that the neoliberal language is, of course, everywhere in the European Union. But it's not, I think just this is an epiphenomenon, another Greek word. Epidermic, another Greek word. Just skin deep, right? Because, let's face it, the Germans are not interested in replacing their corporatist model anyway. They don't buy the Anglo-Saxon model of capitalism. They may use the neoliberal language when it suits them in order to extend their surpluses vis-à-vis Italy and France. But then they will go back and say, oh, no, we are not into casino banking and this and that, and we want to introduce a financial transaction tax, which is what you would expect a social democrat to say. So they are not consistent with their neoliberalism, because they are consistent in the pursuit of a very simple agenda of maximizing their surpluses from their net exports, both within and without the Eurozone. I think I've said enough.
Okay, so let me welcome you all. You've heard a lot. You've been very patient. I'm hoping that some of you have questions, comments, shrieks of horror, whatever it is that might well up in you in response to what you have heard and what the problems are that have been elucidated. So in order that a number of you can get a chance to be heard, it would really help if you could use the microphone, and that if you were please relatively brief. So let me start.
Yes, you mentioned in the beginning that there are now hedge funds who buy the Greek bonds for 30 cents to make the extra 20 to the hair. Who is selling these bonds to them?
Do I answer each one at a time?
Well, that's nice and short, so let's...
That's nice. I can use this one.
Okay.
Other hedge funds.
Why?
Because they may want to get out of this game. They have been burned. Perhaps the ones that bought them for 70, and they fear now they will have to sell them for 20. So they say, okay, let's cut our losses and we'll sell them for 30. Or Greek pension funds, who are desperate to get their hands on some liquidity. This is how markets work.
Thank you for a marvelous presentation. What is the solution? What are some of the possible solutions realistically, given the current situation now of the world economy? And what should we be pushing for? We should be pushing for.
I think that we should be pushing for what we are pushing for a challenge of the notion that this is a crisis of debt. It is not a crisis of debt. I try to climb on top of rooftops and shout it from there. It's a crisis of capitalism. It's a crisis of the recycling of surpluses and deficits, savings and debts. This, you see, yes, there's a lot of debt, but there is a lot, exactly the same amount of savings that have nowhere to go to. And you will never hear anybody on Bloomberg or on NBC talking about this crisis of excessive savings. Will you? Well, it's exactly, why not?
Where are they?
They are everywhere. There are Chinese sovereign wealth funds, extremely rich Americans, extremely rich Germans who have money, and you know what? They don't sleep at night because they don't know what to do with it. Because if I were to give you 10 billion, what would you do with it? You can't put it under your bed. It's just too much, right? And what do you invest it in? You know, there are not many productive activities that make profits these days. So what do? You buy US Treasury bills. Everybody tells you that America is indebted. Japan is extremely indebted. China is not borrowing, so you can't. You would love to lend to China, but China doesn't want it. Okay, so you're really worried. So we have this. So, in answer to your question, challenge the dominant paradigm about what this crisis is about. Challenge the idea that a crisis which was created by financiers must be paid for by the poor. Challenge the idea that whole countries must be obliterated in order to pacify the markets. In other words, keep doing what we're doing.
Also, if I could just very briefly add, it really isn't so different from what we've been talking about here in the United States. We just put our country through a really gruesome economic crisis that hits in December, at least officially, December of 2007. We have plunged roughly 25 million people. We took from about 10 million to more than double it, put them in an extreme unemployment and unincome. We're throwing millions of people out of their homes. We have a country in which people without homes can sit across the street from homes without people and stare at each other. We are now confronting the mass of people with this economic disaster with a spectacle of government response that helps those who have become the richest over the last 30 years, top-down economics, trickle-down economics. We bailed out the banks, insurance companies, large corporations, and our stock market, leaving the mass of people to stare in disbelief as their money, their tax money, was being used to bail out these enterprises. And now we have the third act of the drama. We're watching how the government, shrieking with horror at the borrowing they had to do to bail out the top, deciding that the way to deal with that is to stop spending money on social programs to help recoup the government that we don't need a lesson from Greece. They're in worse shape there, but we're going down the same basic road of trying to shift the burden of capitalism's dysfunction onto the mass of people. And like the Greeks, we're discovering that if the mass of people are in ever deeper economic trouble, then the top-down economics isn't working because there isn't the purchasing power and there isn't the basis for even that attempt to solve the problem. It doesn't work. And we're getting deeper and deeper into the demise. A rational system would not have allowed industry to concentrate in one place called Germany and to be vacated from other places called Greece. That's not a sustainable arrangement in the long run unless you believe you can pound the people who are not getting anything into an endless period of submission. And sooner or later that has to be military and police, and you're getting into the circumstances that even the capitalists must be wary about. So I think the real power of what Yanis is telling us, and Costas too, is that, I believe, as you said, it's the prefiguration of where we're going. We should pay a lot of attention. Sir, over there you had... What? It won't reach?
Oops, oh well. Anyway.
Try.
I mean, it sounds, what you're proposing is sort of the Argentina solution, but at the same time, warning that a collapse, will cause extreme political fallout and possible disintegration. So how does that work?
Well, I wish that I could propose the Argentina solution, but I can't, because Greece is not Argentina, and I'll tell you why it's not Argentina for two reasons. Firstly, we don't have our own currency. Argentina did have its own currency, which was pegged to the dollar, but it was a simple act of breaking that peg. People had pesos in their pockets, they didn't have dollars. Now, in Greece, we don't have a drachma which is linked to the mark. We have the mark in our pockets. And doing it in Argentina would mean two things. Well, let's keep it simple. It would mean reconstituted a currency while people still have the other currency in their pockets. And you know what this would mean? It would mean that the moment they get their hands, they go to the ATM to withdraw money, and suddenly drachmas will come out. And they will try to swap them immediately for euros that other people have in their pockets. So that drachma is going to be divided so fast, it will fall like a stone. And you're going to have a dual economy. You will have the better off who deal in euros, who rent the better apartments in euros, who buy the good stuff in euros. And then you have an underclass that transact in a debased currency. That's not Argentina. It's much worse than Argentina. And secondly, Argentina had soya. And as it defaulted, Chinese demand for soya skyrocketed. So it managed to get out of that. What do we have? Nothing. So my campaign, because I've been campaigning about this, is, and this is where I have fallen out, I've disagreed, and to some extent fallen out with comrades in the Greek left, who've been advocating the Argentina solution. For me, that's not a solution. And it is not a solution for another reason too, because I remain an internationalist and a European. When Greece gets out, if Greece gets out of the euro, then the euro will collapse within 24 hours. Because that's how it's a jigsaw puzzle. You take out one part, the whole thing collapses. And that will be bad for German workers, it will be bad for French workers, it will be bad. Once we're in it, it would have been good not to have entered it, as I said. So I think that while there is still a prospect of fixing the euro system so as to make it as bad as the United States system, which is good compared to the European system, yeah? Then we can have the class struggle that you have. This is our aspiration here. We can fix the euro system. It's quite, I already advocated 3 steps that we need to take regarding the banks, the debt, and the investment. We can do it. So, no to Argentina, even though I would like to say yes to it.
Yeah.
If the Occupy Wall Street protest movement grows more sophisticated and more resistant of the middle class and poor being penalized, what will the government or military reprisals be?
I really don't know. But I've been told by my American friends many years ago, especially back in the 60s and 70s, that the United States government was prepared to bomb its own people in order to preserve the class system that you have. Well, in my country they've already done that many times in the past. So it's not, there's no American exceptionalism here. Having said that, I don't think that anything can be predicted. The good thing about crisis is not only are they bringing us together, but I think that the post-1929 world could never have been predicted or explained or understood on the basis of pre-1929 analytical concepts. Similarly, the future, and that's beautiful, cannot be understood in terms of the pre-2008 world. So I think that the Occupy Wall Street, Occupy Auckland, Occupy Paris, Occupy Athens movement is a great source of rays of hope, and let the powers that be do as they please.
How do your fellow left economists respond to your dire predictions of what would happen if the euro falls?
I think everyone, not just left-wing economists, I think all economists who actually care to stop playing around with silly mathematical models and look at the world, would agree that we are heading for a depression if the euro collapses. The difference between myself and my left-wing colleagues, some, I'm not saying that I'm the only one who believes what I believe, is that they think that, well, it's going to be rotten anyway, so we might as well go the whole hog and destroy the euro now, rather than try to save it. I disagree with it. I disagree with it not predictively, but normatively. I also think it's going to go to the dogs. But I think that it's worth trying to prevent it, because I don't want to see the brown shirts on the streets of Athens, Paris, and Berlin again.
Thanks. As I listen, I'd like to hear something that might try to put it in the context, put all you've been discussing and part of it in the context of war, the continuing war and militarism, and tensions over Islamophobia and hyped up terror scares and things like that. We've seen it on both sides of the Atlantic. At this moment, you know, the U.S. continues to try to achieve hegemony in Central Asia and the Persian Gulf region, and acting as a check on Russia and China. And but you've also just seen, even as you're saying that the Eurozone is crumbling, when I hear commentary about Libya, some have said that the motive for that is that the rich of Europe would like to get North Africa into the Eurozone. I don't know how much credence that has, but you've just had this US-NATO attack on Libya, and I don't know if you have any thoughts of that in the context of this economic crisis.
Well, crisis and war go together. But on this occasion, my feeling is that the elites of Europe are so caught up in a disaster of their own making at home that whenever they order their Phantoms and their Mirage jets to move outside the borders of Europe and drop their bombs, it's got to do more with an attempt to shore up some political support rather than to fuel the fires of economic imperialism. So President Sarkozy is facing an election. He doesn't even understand what on earth is happening with the euro. He's utterly frustrated by the fact that he doesn't have the right to say what he thinks to Mrs. Merkel. So he takes it out on Libya. Not he takes it out on Libya, but he uses it as an opportunity to appear to the world, and primarily to the French world, as a leader. So we're going to, I think, to a more primitive form of imperialism than we used to be. The United States is far more interesting. I think that the 2008 crisis also has loosened the Americans' grip on geopolitical movements and the shifts of tectonic plates in Asia and in Africa in particular. Africa is a very interesting case. Of course, the hegemony of the United States remains, and both the Pentagon and other sources of authority here in the United States will continue to pursue those projects. But what is very interesting is that the Arab Spring has already become so deeply divided. So on the one hand, you have what happened in Tunisia and in Egypt, which were genuinely popular movements, secular movements primarily, and movements that had to do with, they were just spontaneous revolutions against economic crime, coercion, and imposition of unbearable economic circumstances on the vast majority of the population. Libya is a very different case. Libya is supported by the very same emirates and regimes which are resisting those popular uprisings on their own soil. And I think the way in which Gaddafi was murdered, that gruesome manner, is quite telling of the difference between what happened in Libya and elsewhere.
Folks, we are running out of time. We've been here 2 hours, which is a long time. So let me call on one more person, and then you can come up and have some kind of conversation. And I'm sorry, I wish we had more time to do more of this. And then I have one short announcement to make. So, yeah, sir.
Hi, Yanis. What is your critique of the Communist Party and Syriza in of the handling of the situation in Greece?
Did everyone hear that? The question is, how does Yanis view the position of the Communist Party inside Greece and its program? And it might be useful just briefly to summarize what that is and then respond to the question.
Well, there are two main parties of the left in Greece. It's a traditional Communist Party of Greece, which has returned to its Stalinist roots recently. Officially, this is not name calling. It rehabilitated Stalin. It has about 8–9%. I really like them. But the problem with the Communist Party of Greece, in my estimation, is that they want to be irrelevant. They want to be irrelevant. They are not interested in storming the Winter Palace or the Summer Palace. They're not interested in participating in debate with the rest of the political forces. They're interested in preserving their little shop, which is on a nice corner, so it has its own steady customers coming in, if you know what I mean. It's not a revolutionary party. It's not a party that has the capacity to inspire, because it uses language which look, in the last election I voted for them. But the only way I could bring myself to do it is by not listening to them for at least 3 months. Now, the other party, which is the evolution of the Euro-Communist Party of the 1970s and 1980s, I have a very good personal relationship with its leader, Alexis Tsipras, but they are so unknowingly fragmented. They are not a party, they're a movement, which means that they comprise officially 25 sections, and they hate each other. And the poor leader is trying to speak words that would not offend any of those 25 feuding people, sections within it. I don't have time for this. You know, I just don't have time for this.
But does I think, is there a clear position that the party articulates about what should happen in Greece that you could comment on?
Syriza agrees with my position. And I have to say that Alexis Tsipras, the leader, has often actually asked me to write speeches for him in Parliament and so on and so forth. The Communist Party has a line that before socialism comes, it's all stuffed. So what's the point of talking about it? And more or less that's the line. That, you know, they do not distinguish, for instance, in American parlance between new dealers and Herbert Hoover supporters. They think that it's all rubbish, that we have to wait for the dawn of socialism and then everything will be fixed. And as I said, I mean, I can't even begin to enter into conversation with this.
All right, folks, I want to thank you all for coming, and I appreciate it.